Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here to host this discussion on impact unicorns. My company just released a report on impact tech and how it can help tackling big global problems such as reversing climate change, tackling the sustainable development goals. And while we spoke with people, experts, innovators from around the world, many of them were convinced that you can make a dent on those problems while at the same time making profitable businesses. So that's many people already agreeing on. However, impact unicorns, is that a myth or a reality? You're very lucky, we all are, because today, to answer this question, we have three amazing speakers. I would like you to welcome Sofia Hmich, who is the founder of Future Positive Capital, which is a pan-European venture capital fund dedicated to deep technology that are solving the world's most pressing problems. Thanks, Sofia. I would also like to welcome Bertrand Badré, who was, yes, he is the author of Can Finance Save the World? He was also the former managing director of the World Bank, and is currently the CEO of Blue Like an Orange Sustainable Capital. He is investing in emerging markets, which are at the same time delivering risk-adjusted returns and social impact. Thanks, Bertrand, for coming and joining us. And finally, Antoine Hubert, who is the CEO of Ynsect. You might have heard of it. Ynsect is using and exploring the amazing properties of insects to create with that and increase, upgrade the any kind of biomass, into high quality compounds for nutrition and for green chemistry. And he also has like very important announcement just made by Macron yesterday. He's now part of the next 40. So please give a warm round of applause to my speakers. So, before we jump straight into the debate, I would like you maybe to, for us to feel a bit more connected with you, if you could share a fun fact about you, so before we start.
So maybe because I'm the old guy here, let me start with the real story behind this stage. It looks like one of these random panels put together by France Digital, but it's not. Actually, I left the World Bank 3 years ago, and I started to wonder whether finance was useful or not, and I wrote that book, Can Finance Save the World? I'm not sure whether you think it's a yes or a no. And then a few months later, I got a call from Sofia, who I never heard of. He said, Bertrand, I'm coming to visit you in Washington. I read your book, it's great, I'm moving forward, can we meet? And that's how it started. She came, and we decided to help each other, and then she said, oh, by the way, I know this guy, Antoine, is a great guy. And that's our story. And then when I received the invitation to be on stage with Sofia and Antoine, I couldn't believe it. So it started in my garden in Washington, D.C., and it finishes at the Musée des Arts Forains. So quite implausible.
Awesome, thank you.
So just to clarify, So Bertrand is one of my investors, and I invested in my past life in Ynsect. So it's kind of a full circle here, so it's amazing to be here. Well, I know you asked me this just before. I was like, I just don't have a fun fact, I'm afraid. I'm just not a fun person as such. That said, most of my colleagues, and one of is here, Alex, most people say I'm weird, so I can kind of share a weird fact, maybe, that can, if I can trade those two. And so I have a few of them, but the main one that kind of bother people is that I start my meal with the dessert. And anyways, I can see smiles. If someone loves dessert, they all do that. Drink my coffee cold and keep my cups for like all the day, even if it's empty. A bunch of things like that.
Thank you. Antoine.
About insects, I think I've been in contact with them for a long time, catching butterflies when I was a very small kid, or farming very small worms in my kitchen, which was a bit weird for my wife now, to have these worms under the small kitchen, 30 square meters in Paris.
That's sweet. Who would say that a couple of years after you would be part of the next 40 and with such a successful startup? So thank you for this quick intro. Let's jump straight into the debate then. And I'd like to start with you, Bertrand, because I think you'll be able to give like the broad perspective of this sector. For many years, I think we've been talking about impact, social and environmental impact as something that's good, especially for the financial sector, but something that you wouldn't be able to make money out of it. And now I have the impression that things are changing, and you see more and more companies and investors believing that you can have, at the same time, both impact and good financial returns. You have 20 years of experience in this financial sector or something, so you'll probably be able to tell us how do you see things changing?
Well, I think there are things changing, but we should not fool ourselves. It's not changing fast enough, it's not changing big enough, it is not changing in depth. So we are still pioneers, we are still prophets in a way. And if you allow me to take a look back at history, and I think this is very important that we discuss this today. During the 19th century, the focus of finance was on return only. I mean, you could grab the land, you can dig for a mine, and when it was over, you move elsewhere, to Africa, to Siberia, to California. 20th century, we've been a little bit more sophisticated. We combine risk and return. And this has led to the creation of the private equity business, the venture capitalism, everything we've learned at school about finance and valuation. What I believe is critical for the 21st century, we add to the risk and return the impact variable. It's intrinsically part of the financial model, and this should be taught in business schools right now. It's not a nice add-on for profits, it must move to the core of finance. And I'm very serious. I've been engaged in that. I spent 25 years on finance. If we don't change it, we have a big, big, big problem. So we should refuse to stay at the periphery, and impact should become the new normal, part of the very core of the financial analysis. And we are not there. We are not there, and we should not fool ourselves. It's great to be together, but we have to push. We can't be shy about this. That's critical.
Thank you very much. I think, Sofia, you also had an interesting perspective on that, because you've been looking a lot on different sectors with future positive capital, right? And some studies have been estimating the annual market for solutions for sustainable development goals, for instance, as something around 12 trillion US dollars per year. So there are massive opportunities in there. Which are the sectors that you identify as being those where you would find those big opportunities?
Yeah, so just to link with what Bertrand was saying, indeed, like the way we kind of, as more macro, almost philosophical level, the tool we use is innovation and capital entrepreneurship innovation towards that kind of new definition of finance. So, and I genuinely believe that this is the hack of the systems, that the more you have unicorns, people making money no matter how, but in reality, like solving big problems in a very profitable way, this is, I think, how you make so I'm very bottom up in that approach. So, sorry, to come back to your question, definitely it's 12 trillion according to that report, which means, which is interesting that it's mainly creation of markets. And again, Ynsect is a very good example, something completely new, which means less competition, and it requires most of the time a radical innovation to even able to open the market. The one we look at the moment a lot, but agriculture remains a big focus, but construction, no, 10% according to the studies, but 8 to 10 emission of CO2, completely unmodernized economy, booming in China and India. There's a lot to do there, and you can do it in a way that is more efficient and more sustainable. Assistive technologies, like same, if you look at it from a demographical angle, elderly, 1 billion people, very few companies develop products and services for those. So we like to advance materials, etc. We like to load of things where people are not looking at it. And because indeed, like there is kind of a sector perspective, and if you look from a technological perspective, most of the capital today is allocated in digital, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you look at the spectrum of opportunity, there's way more to be done in companies or actually developing more advanced technology. It's statistically only 16% going to those companies. So from a sector perspective and technological perspective, there is massive opportunity to be taken.
Thank you. So Antoine, would you consider yourself an impact unicorn? I mean, when you spoke earlier, you also told me a little bit about your path from a non-profit to one of the hottest startups in the French ecosystem right now. Maybe you could share that a bit with the audience as well, and also telling us whether it is your goal to become, achieve this billion-dollar valuation, but more than that, maybe impact billions of people around the globe.
Okay, well, first, we are not yet an unicorn. Someday. And indeed, the way we started with my founders, Jean-Gabriel here, so from an idea, an NGO, so NGO working in food sustainability, so we were volunteers, so we were really committed activists. It was really a commitment, and from these volunteer jobs, one day, after several days discussions, we come out with this idea of Ynsect in this food sustainability angle, and to just spin off a real entrepreneurial idea and to go from education to manufacturing and production. So it was a big move almost 10 years ago now, 2011, 2012. And if you want to, and the background is education is good, is absolutely necessary, but it's very long time of impact, 1 generation, 2 generations. And I think we were a bit frustrated, and manufacturing, going into production can change drastically also all the value chains. And so our ambitions are big, because if we want to make something, having a real impact, we cannot just be the French, I would say, leader. We need to be a global player, producing insects overall in the world. And our target is to generate at least 5 billion in the next decade or so of revenues. So valuation should be much more than that in the future.
That's awesome. So it's somehow following this path brought you to scale even your solutions and the impact that you were creating with this entrepreneurial point of view. That's super exciting. Something that I saw also during the research is that some people really like the impact label, while others try to avoid its use, because somehow it, for some people, it still gave the wrong impression that financial returns might be lower, while others really believe that being purpose-driven and stating that clearly helps to attract capital, to attract talent, and to attract customers. So do you have any takes on that?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. When I started Brew Like an Orange, I say I'm an impact investor. I pitch the Dutch people, and they say, never mention impact anymore. There have been too many mis-sellings, etc. People have sold us a kind of dirt soup, so change your name. I say, okay. So you bring financial returns, and on top of that, you have an impact. But don't confuse the two things. The market will make its way. Some people would argue that with impact you have a better return. Some people would argue that with impact you have a lower return. I cannot decide. So let's separate the two things, focus on the type of returns you're targeting, and on top of that you have impact. And that's really the shift that needs to happen. If you want to get institutional investors on board, the pension funds, the life insurers, you can't play with that. It's as simple as that. So keep the idea of impact. I think it's essential, but don't kind of label it impact investment too often. And just to add on that, I think, again, insisting on what I said earlier, we are at the forefront of a shift that needs to happen. We are still living under the mantra of Milton Friedman, who said 50 years ago, the social purpose of business is to make profit. And that's what has irrigated the system. And we need to move to the next stage, which is the social purpose of business is to find profitable solutions for the planet and for the people. It's not that profit is bad, it's that profit is a means to an end. And that's make it sustainable, impactful, etc. It looks nice and easy like this, but this is a revolution of the next 20, 25 years.
Thank you. Would you like to react on that, Sofia?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's the same story when we started to raise the fund with Alex. The story was more around that. We stopped after 2 months. It's like, okay, it's not going to work. The same company, same thesis, just the way you phrase it is different. So in our world, we talk about positive. It's kind of straightforward, but people understand enough, and it's not. And the reason, and I'm going to, so it depends for who. So entrepreneurs, wonderful. Like 91% of consumer wants to eat healthy, sustainable. 2/3 of the talent want that. Not just millennial. It's just like people want aspire to meaning in their life, and that's really cross generation. There's a lot of retention is higher 3 times. So wonderful for some companies. As an investor, it's a different story because of what Bertrand explained. So it's something and just because historically impact investing has been associated to emerging market, illiquid, some specific things. And now what we're doing is different from that thing. So people can't really make a difference for if they're not in the space. So that's why we need to have a different wording and different branding as well.
Yeah, I would like to hear from you, Antoine, because When we spoke, you told me that being in this intersection between tech and impact was not exactly an issue for you when raising funds. However, what was more difficult was the high risk of building an industrial company and this need to align different partners. Can you maybe share with the audience also a bit of that?
Yeah, indeed. I think it's the addition. We are impact. We are food, more farming, living organism. So it's super. You can't control everything, and we are manufacturing. So the three of them together makes quite a difficult, I will say, a topic of venture and company. But as impact is part of our DNA, it was not the main driver for investors. They were really trying to understand manufacturing and how we farm insects. If we want to make an impact, indeed, we need to change how consumers are buying, purchasing for platforms. But it will be just half of the job, and facing all the challenges, this news again about +7 degrees, climate change in the next decades. We need to change also how we produce things, anything, energy, materials, but food. So manufacturing is super complex, super risky. You need big economies of scale. It's first of its kind. You have no benchmark. So I think this was the main difficulties in today. There are not enough investors understanding impact and manufacturing in the overall area. So hopefully it will grow with more corporate investments, but also more institutional investments and public funds going into this without changing the start of the chain, the value chains. We won't be able to tackle all the challenges by just changing how we buy products.
So a nice call for maybe some here to take bigger risks, but also looking for the impact that it's actually going to have. Bertrand, there are some voices now that are arguing that this obsession with the billion-dollar company valuation might not necessarily be the healthiest for the ecosystem. And there is this community, the Zebra Unite community that started in the US and is now getting a little bit bigger, which is actually advocating for the zebra model, which they define as being like real animals, first of all, which are at the same time black and white, meaning that they are looking for profitable, like for profits in profitable businesses, but also about creating positive impact in society, and that it actually thrives in groups and not alone as maybe some of the unicorns would. Do you think, because one of the things that they also say is that there is a need for support for this type of company that might not necessarily have an exponential growth, and they need different types of funding. Do you think that there is a need for that indeed? Do you see other models that could be more adapted and interesting for impact space?
I think, first of all, we should never be obsessed with one model, because then, it's like a troop of sheep. We all go in the wall, or we all fall from the cliff. So we should really encourage the diversification. I'm glad if in the impact zoo you have unicorn, you have zebra, you have blue-orange panda, you have whatever. So we should really not be obsessed. I mean, you have many, many different needs, many, many different ways. Some people need to scale up and need to be big because that's how you have an impact. And some people might have a local impact, and it's a different story. So again, I think what we need also, and that's why these unicorn or zebra story are important, we need stories. We know that as human beings, what makes us different from other species is the fact that we understand stories, we build stories, we follow stories. So I think it's important. The unicorn has been a myth under different format for many, many years, many, many centuries. Today's format is a tech unicorn. It might change again. It's important. It makes people dream, it makes people move. So let's have an open zoo with a lot of animals.
Fantastic. And eventually, and hopefully also having different types of funding mechanisms for them, being blended capital, mezzanine capital as you do offer, revenue-based, and so many others. But maybe for the VC specifically, it's quite hard to have that. Maybe you'd like to react just a bit, Sofia, on that tricky part of the unicorn.
Yeah, so definitely I think some businesses would be better off with evergreen fund, which are funds that are open. So VC would be classically like 5 years of investment, 5 years of divestment, meaning that you can sell your asset and you can extend into 2 years. So sometimes business need more than that. So there is a real question for investors: is it compatible? And some of them would probably benefit for something different. So again, Bertrand is right. We need a bit of everything. But where is true about I think there is an obsession about valuation versus value, and they're more and more decorrelated in a lot of ecosystem, and that's for me the real problem, less than the instrument. And people now, they celebrate how much they raise. They should celebrate how much they make, whatever you do. So that's something that always struck me, and it's something that, so we quite anti-hype at FPC because of that. It's like, okay, what's the value? What's your company? What's your technology? What's your market? What's your team? And then we can talk about valuation. It's kind of two different topics at the moment. So I think for me, that's the main problem, and France is doing quite bad at the moment on that front. Yeah.
Thank you. And I would like to jump on that because we spoke about the valuation, now the value that is created, and let's speak also about impact, right? Because one of the issues that is obviously correlated to that is impact management. How do you actually prove that you're having the impact that you are claiming to? Antoine, you are kind of doing innovative things in this field. Maybe can you share a little bit on how do you manage the impact of your company?
It's true, because you need to prove that your commitment is real. The word is called greenwashing. So you need to have this understood by the communities, stakeholders. So we are using this well-known but complex tools called life cycle assessment, but it takes months to implement it, to measure, do everything. So what we want to do now is to go beyond with my partner, Jean-Gabriel, is to try to have a dynamic measurements of impact every minute, every second, be able to follow our impact from the manufacturing and all the corporates, linked to all this, the IT infrastructure, so the ERP. In ERP system, you follow flows of sales, but then flow of cash. You can measure from this flow of impact. It's not so difficult, so we are developing these innovative things and be able also to show it to our stakeholders. And I think it's good worth also to mention the work of France Digital under the France Impact. They have designed this tool, Zai, that they will talk about, and we have tested this. I think it's a good tool for everyone, and beyond just the impact companies like us, what is important is that all companies, even the one that don't have impact as a motto, include this in their model and show where their work and their improvement also, because it's a work for everyone to face the challenges.
Thank you. So speaking about France Digital, and we're here in France, well, I just checked the CB Insights data for this morning, and we have around 400 unicorns, almost 200 of them in the US, almost 100 in China, and a little less than 50 in Europe, if you count Europe as a whole. This is kind of a cliche question, so I'll try to frame it a little bit different. Do you think that Europe's big potential with deep tech talents and the focus on impact, actually, can it help to create better, more and better unicorns? I would love to hear your take on that. Whomever feels that, yeah.
Well, I'm completely biased. That's our thesis. So yeah, that's definitely FPC was born because of that reality. It was really, none of us aspired to become an asset manager, really. But seeing the gap and the opportunity of the market, we started to do that. So just to give you a few numbers, always easier just to make it more objective, better. Europe is by far the most prolific ecosystem for science and engineering in the world. We have 2 million talent, and that's huge, more than the US, more than China, etc. There is a natural, in the culture, this sustainability ethos. It's part of our history, it's part of who we are. So it's normal to pay taxes, it's normal to care. It's just part of who we are, which is not a value system that you have in other regions. So there's a lot of other elements, but just those two, if you come back, caring about developing solutions that matter for the greater good and using radical innovation to do it, that's what we know. So there is a massive opportunity. The downside today, but it's really improving, so I really want to be positive here, is that there's a lack of funding. So in China, people put a lot of liquidity behind those companies. If they die, too bad. If they go well, they explode. In the US, it's the same. MIT, Stanford, they have a lot of capital associated to those ecosystems. So and Antoine would be very quickly, backed with 50, 100 million, way quicker than it's been here. There's no doubt about this. So there's kind of a lack of capital who is holding back a bit, but there's more and more going to it. So I'm very optimistic about the place Europe will take in that ecosystem.
If I may add, living in the US and being French and European in the US, I'm very sensitive to that. I think that the number of unicorns is more a symptom than a real issue per se. At the end of the day, we don't really care about the rankings in the world. What we care about is the sovereignty of Europe. As we very well know and start seeing, there is a growing divide, or let's say a tech curtain between the US and China, and I don't want Europe to fall in the trap, being nowhere. So I think it's interesting because through the sovereignty angle, a number of people start to realize, hey, we just cannot have to choose between one of the other. And that might be the catalyst for bringing us to the next level. It's not done, it's going to be extremely difficult, but we've got the money, we've got the talent, we've got everything. So now we have to make the puzzle with all these pieces. But for me, it's a topic of sovereignty, not to fall in the trap between the Silk Road and the America First options.
Yeah, I think you shook your head. You agree with what they just said.
Yeah, sovereignty is key.
Okay, perfect. So I have a final question for the three of you, very briefly, because we don't have much time. A final advice for our audience today, to leave them with something to think about what they can do in this space.
For me, I come back to my introduction, so I try to be consistent for at least 30 minutes. Make impact the norm. Don't put yourself in this nice little box outside the system. We have to make it the norm in 25 years and move to the main stage.
Thank you. Well, I guess with that, we can close the panel. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this panel.
Well, if I may just ask you, so how many are entrepreneurs in the room? Yeah, so for those, I would definitely advise to look as well at the European level at least. Don't stay narrow in kind of what France would do or not do. It really is not the case anymore. So if someone doesn't understand wherever you are, just go somewhere else, and for sure you'll find someone who get it and love it. So just expand a bit the scope of what you're looking for.
Thank you very much.